Okay, greetings. I'm going to try and keep this short but sweet. And it's really some suggestions for community response to the Covid-19 crisis that's taking place right now. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting asked questions left, right, centre about it, and everyone I know is talking about it, and there's a sense of panic that's starting to grow, and we kind of have to address that. We don't have confidence in the government and its response, and I'll talk about that later. So let me start by explaining where we're at. It's the 15th of March 2020. We know that some 5,800 people have passed away as a result of the virus. We know there's a confirmed 156,000 people who have been infected with the virus. And out of that, we know that there's around 74,000 people who have recovered. Now that figure is actually quite low, 74,000, because it's still less than half. But thankfully, if we're looking at the data from what's happening in China, we know that the fatality rate is between 1%, 1.4%, going up to perhaps 3-4%. Now, if we look at the UK figures to get some context on this, there's been some 1,100 people who have been confirmed infected. And sadly, 21 people have lost their lives, and that's off the 15th of March. But there's a big problem with these figures, and that is it's widely believed that they're grossly underestimated. I'm not talking about the deaths, the fatalities, I'm talking about the infected rate. You see, the science has already told us that those figures of 1,100 infected in the UK can't really be trusted. We know that they're underreported. You see, what many people suspect, myself included, is that the government is actually placing the economy and profit before the needs of people and their safety. And this isn't helped by Telegraph economists expressing kind of what we know is going on inside government minds, that actually a cull of the elderly would actually boost the economy, getting rid of the economically inactive, as they call them. Now, you see, in contrast to what the government is actually saying, we know that the science has told us that those figures of 1,100 infected in the UK is a gross underestimate. And we now know that there are those who are thinking about some herd immunity strategy to protect the nation. And I say protect the nation with inverted commas because the herd immunity strategy is actually a gamble that the government is playing with our lives. And this kind of relies on, ministers kind of like trying its best to make sure that some 60% of the population becomes infected deliberately. Now this is a risky and arguably, well, it's not even arguably, it's clearly immoral strategy. So one of the most important questions that many people are asking themselves are, am I at risk? How do I know whether I have the virus, especially if I can't get a test unless I go to hospital? Well, there are some key symptoms. The first things are the high temperature, which is symptomatic of a fever, and then a continuous dry coughing, and then a sense of fatigue. If you're getting these symptoms, then the reality of the situation is that you are likely to have coronavirus. Now, there are some factors we have to give special attention to when trying to ascertain who is at risk. Now, if you have an underlying health problem, you've probably heard this term quite a lot, but let me spell it out to you. If you have a chronic heart disease, if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, you have chronic lung disease, you have any of those symptoms, then you are at a greater risk of fatality from Covid-19. And it's imperative that you call 111 because you are in the group that requires monitoring and could need help with your respiratory system to see you through it. The virus tends to last in your system for around 7 days, and then its effects dissipate, they become weaker. But in those early days, you are at risk. Now, to those under 21 who catch the virus, there seems to be little consequence to their health, really. The symptoms are quite mild and they recover quite quickly. And this is in many ways perhaps why the government is reluctant to close schools, even though I suspect that they should, because the young people who go to school, even if they are recovering from the virus, they are becoming spreaders. And what happens by continuously exposing themselves to those who have it and then going home, they risk passing it on to their parents, to their uncles, to their aunties, and of course to their grandparents, those who are in the older age bracket, which makes them far more vulnerable. Because the figures from China show that from the moment you're above the age of 50, each decade it gets progressively worse. But from 50 to 60, 60 to 70, and definitely in your 80s, the chance of recovery diminishes. It doesn't mean you're definitely going to pass away from the virus. There's a good chance you will recover. Okay, so one of the key questions is what can we do to deal with COVID-19? Well, the first thing is to recognise that we have to be sensible. This panic buying for toilet paper is nonsense. We're not going to catch the virus from skid marks. So situations like the nonsense that's taking place outside Waitrose today, where people are panic buying, is ridiculous. Those with the resources to actually overstock, to make sure that they can hoard items, they're placing those who are most vulnerable, those without the money, at risk. The other thing we can do relies very much on common sense, and it means getting enough sleep, it means drinking plenty of water, fluids, and eating healthy. You see, because the only way to deal with COVID-19 is either to get it, recover, so you have the antibodies, or wait until a vaccine comes around. It's not like the flu. The flu's fatality rate is, 0.1%. Fatality rate for COVID-19, like I said, is between 1.4 to 3%. There is no cure, even though obviously a vaccine will emerge within a year's time, or it's likely to do. But the single most important thing that we can do right now, and the thing that motivated me to actually make this video, is actually we need to look out for our family members, our elderly, our neighbours, those who are most vulnerable, and we need to do that now. It means if you have neighbours who are at risk, I'm talking about by age, or you have family members who are at risk, or vulnerable people that you know, talk with them today. Just check that they have family members who can come by and get them supplies of food. So even if they're self-isolating, they're not isolated. It might mean just giving them your phone number and letting them know that they can give you a phone call so that you can go off to the shops and get something for them if they need it. Well, in many ways, this is like the UK's Katrina moment, where those who are most vulnerable are at risk. I think about those in my community who suffer from sickle cell and have underlying health problems. Now, some of them aren't in their 50s, or they're not in their 70s or 80s, but because they have risk to multiple organs, if they were to catch the virus, the dangers could be catastrophic. So we have to look out for them. Now, if you can't afford to engage in social distancing, then be prepared. That means walk around with gloves, with wipes, with sanitizers. If you can't find sanitizers to buy because some people have kind of like raided every single store in your area, make your own. And make sure you tell your children, in fact tell everyone in your family, when they come home, the first thing they must do is wash their hands. It's a really simple measure, but it's just another way like taking off your shoes to make sure you don't bring negative germs or energy into the house, into the space. Wash your hands and explain why. Make sure that the children aren't ignorant of the facts. A lot of people running jokes about this, but even though the young people might not be affected, if they're responsible or feel that they're responsible for harming or passing something that killed one of their grandparents or their parents, trust me, the social implications, the mental health issues will be enormous. To help them, keep them informed, make sure everybody in the community actually knows that they've got a role to play and make sure that they play it. Can't trust government on this. No, sir. Now, despite the apathetic response from the government up to date, the unilateral decision by many sporting bodies and schools and universities to actually take effective action against COVID-19 means that the UK government is going to make some changes pretty soon. Now, the most scary thing of all is that there are rumours that the government are going to give the police powers to arrest people who won't self-isolate. Now, as someone from a minority community, giving the police, who already abuse stop and search powers, more draconian tools to discriminate against people is not something that I look forward to. I suspect in the next couple of days we're going to hear that elders are being encouraged to self-isolate. Rumours are it's going to be up to 4 months, which is, well, really scary. This is why we must have a community response in place, because when that does happen, there's going to be pretty much chaos. And we cannot leave our elders and most vulnerable alone at their time of need. Now, I suspect there'll be some of you thinking, okay, this is what the government's likely to do. You've told us what we should be doing, but what should our government be doing? I mean, after all, we do pay taxes. Well, the first thing is that the government has to invest in the NHS now. We need more ICU units. We need more ventilators. Right now, there's around 5,000 ventilators across the UK. And we know, especially if the government continues on this reckless herd immunity gamble, that peak's going to burst that 5,000 target. And then people will die. And that's unnecessary. That's a risk that does not need to take place. So if you really want to put pressure on the government, make them invest in the NHS now. We also need widespread testing because science doesn't work with inaccurate figures. So pretending that there's only 1,000 people in the UK who are infected, when that figure is closer to 10,000, means that any plans that are being devised by everyone else are working with faulty assumptions. And this is really reckless. I can't stress how reckless it is. This decision to minimise testing to save money, it's not going to end well. Likewise, when the vaccine's available, we need to start ramping up to make sure that this government doesn't have plans to charge people for the vaccine, to put barriers in place for the most vulnerable to access the vaccine. You see, because there will be a cost implication. But as you just saw from the recent budget, the government has the cash to splurge. They can actually afford to make sure that everyone in the UK who hasn't developed immunity from Covid-19 can be vaccinated free of charge. And if it doesn't do so, there should be riots on the streets. And so my last suggestion for what the government should do, greetings, my last suggestion is really, if the government is so insistent on carrying on with this herd immunity strategy, this gamble, I think it should lead by example. I think it should do a Edwina Curry and self-infect. Ministers should go into wards where people have Covid-19 and self-infect and develop the antibodies themselves and become the leaders of that herd, because that's what they're elected to do. So I'm going to sign off. I know there's so much more we could have talked about and I could have covered, but those are really the basics. Please share this, not just on Facebook or YouTube, but also in WhatsApp groups, because a lot of people who are getting dodgy information, and that dodgy information is not helpful. We're seeing in countries around the world, it's led to violence in small villages where people are petrified because they don't have the facts. So share it, ask questions, stay informed, but most importantly, stay safe. And even if you are not at risk, because you don't fall into the age group that's at risk, because you don't have underlying health problems, please be mindful of the vulnerable in our community. Our elders, our uncles, our aunties, our parents, they need us now more than ever. And the loss of their lives, of those loved ones, are not an acceptable cost that any of us should be planning to actually welcome into our lives. May the ancestors continue to guide and protect us all. Ashe.